This is Mr. Gillum, and today we're going to be looking more at positive and negative numbers. So your instruction book on page 114. It says Jana and a friend are playing a game that shows a number line from -7 to 7. The game is played with 15 cards and numbered with the integers from -7 to 7. The players draw a card from the pile. They earn points for correctly locating the number on the card on the number line and then identifying its positive or its opposite. So I guess before we do anything, we should think about what an opposite is. So let's make a list of opposites. Okay. The opposite of -1 would be the number that is the same distance away from 0 as -1, but on the other side. So -1 is 1 away from 0. Positive 1 would be its opposite. The opposite of -3 would be +3. The opposite of 5 would be -5. The opposite of 4 would be -4. The opposite of -2 would be +2. And the opposite of 1 would be -1. You can see that -1 and 1 are opposites either way you think about it, because they're always the same distance away from 0. That works for fractions or decimals or anything. If it's a 1/2, then the opposite would be -1/2. So that's why we try not to use the word opposite when we're talking about operations. Like plus is not the opposite of minus. Or I should say multiply is not the opposite of divide. Those are actually inverse operations. Addition and subtraction are inverse operations. They add to 0. So opposites are the same number but on the other side of the number line. So what we need to do is finish labeling the number line. So I know that the ones on the right side are the counting numbers, the natural numbers. We talked about those a million times. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I think pretty much everybody knew that that's where those numbers were. If I start at 0 and I go the other direction, I count the same way from 0 going backwards. -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7. And so the number line has every integer from 0 to 7 and 0 to -7. And I want to point out that there's arrows here at the end of our number line indicating that those numbers will go and go and go and go forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Okay. So if Janet draws a card that shows -3, that would be at this point. It already was labeled in our book. That's the point -3. What number is the opposite of -3? Oh, well, we already kind of talked about that. It's the number that's the same distance from 0 on the other side. So if -3 is 3 away from 0, then I know 1, 2, 3, 3 is in the opposite, +3. And it says it's the same distance away from 0 in the other direction. So 0 is the middle. 0 is the center of the math universe. It's on either side of it, it's like yin and yang. Whatever's the positives, there's also negatives of the same value. So Jana's friend draws a card that shows a 0. Draw a point at 0. What is the opposite of 0? Ooh, good question. We have an exception to the rule here. 0 does not have an opposite. 0 is its own opposite. 0 is the same distance away from 0. And that's the only thing that is 0 away from 0 is 0 itself. So that's why it is its own opposite. It says the next card drawn is -6. How far from 0 is -6? Well, let's just take a look here. If here's -6, let's count to see how far away it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. -6 is 6 away from 0. It is 6 to the left of 0. And so we're going to draw a point at -6. There's that point right there. I think it's already on your paper. It should be on your paper. It says, what is the same distance from 0 as -6, but in the other direction? Well, let's just find out. If -6 is 6 away, let's count 6 in the positive direction. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some of you hopefully are getting this mental math exercise, and you probably already knew 6 was the number. That was that far away. I always seem to do that. There we go. And Sorry about that. And it says two numbers are the same distance from 0 but on different sides of 0 are called opposites. Opposite numbers. Okay, so 3 would be the opposite of -3. It says graph each integer and its opposite on the number line below. So mine actually printed off the answer already on it, but I'm going to go one by one with you. So we'll do 5 in blue. 5 would be this number. 5's opposite would be 5 in the other direction from 0, -5. So those are the opposite, or 5 and its opposite. -1 right here, its opposite would be +1 right here. You can see that they're both the same distance from 0. 4 is right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. In the other direction of 0 would be -4. So hopefully you're starting to see a pattern here with opposites. It's the same exact number, just with the opposite sign. -2 is here. +2 is here. Those are opposites. So you can see a different color for each opposite pair. It says, look at the number lines on the previous page. There are numbers between the numbers you just graphed. Just as whole numbers can be positive or negative, fractions and decimals can also be positive or negative. The number 1.5 is between 1 and 2. The number -1.5 is between -2 and -1. Draw a point at 1.5 and a point at -1.5 on the number line below. Label each point with its value. So I'm going to tell you that this is a common mistake here. When people graph the -1.5, they see -1 and then they go another 0.5, and they like to try to put -1.5 there. But -1.5 should be 1.5 away from 0, and so you can see why they would put -1.5 would be here. You would understand why they might think that, but really, because they're on the negative side, they should actually be going -1 and then another half, which would be right there. So that's a common mistake that people make. When I graph negative numbers, a lot of times I will think of graphing the positive number and then graphing its opposite, like folding this number line right over, and it would end up right here. It's the same distance on the other side of 0. So just be careful. Do not skip to your negative numbers and say, oh, -1.5 would be -1.5 right here. A lot of people want to put it there. It is still between -1 and -2, just like 1.5 is in between 1 and 2. Okay, so be careful when you're graphing your negative point values. It says, how is locating -1.5 on a number line the same as locating 1.5 on a number line? How is it different? Well, -1.5 is the same distance from 0 on a number line as 1.5, but you're moving the other direction. So it says, use the number line below to graph the following numbers. Label each point with its value, and then graph the label the opposite of each number. So I know that 1 and 1/2 would be, if this is 1 here, that would be 1. And if this is 2, that would be a half right there, 1 and 1/2. Okay, its opposite will be the same distance in the other direction, -1, and if this is 2, and another -1/2. Those are opposites, okay? +1 1/2 and -1 1/2. Now we got to worry about this, and these are where things get tricky. -1 and 1/4. So -1 is here, and if this is 2, then -1/4, another 1/4 would be there. A lot of people try to go to -1 and then try to put their point here because it's a 1/4 away from -1. But remember, you're going that far away from 0. This point is only -3/4. Okay, it is only 3/4 of a whole from 0. That's why it does not go there. So if that's -1 and 1/4, I could also see the positive version, +1 and 1/4. Okay, and then finally -1 1/2. So if there's 1 here and 0 here, I want to go halfway in between. There's -1 1/2. And then the same distance from 0, but on the other side, +1 1/2. Okay, so again, I tried to color code those so you can see where the opposites are. The negative ones can be confusing because students want to go back 1 and then another 1/4, or they won't think about moving a distance. They'll just find -1 and think about another 1/4, and they'll go the wrong way. So be careful that that's how far away from 0 you are. So make sure that you're going in the correct direction when you're graphing your negative points. says write a positive or negative number to represent each situation. You owe $25. That means whatever $25 I have, I'm in debt. When you are in debt and you owe people money, it is a negative value. If people owe you money, then you're at a positive value. Or you have extra money, you're at a positive value. So if we owe money, I would say that's negative 25. Because you have spent more money than you have. A team has a gain of 20 yards in a football game. If we're gaining, we're going forward, we're going positive. So I would say that would be positive 20. You don't need to put the plus in front of the 20 because if you write a number, we automatically assume that it's positive unless specifically it has a minus sign or a negative sign in front. This says 2 floors below ground level. So if here's ground level, we count that 0 right there. It'd be like a hospital or building or skyscraper, right? And there's a floor, there's a floor, there's a floor. Well, if we're down below the floor, that would be the negative value. So we would say negative 2. 15 degrees above 0 degrees Celsius. So now we're going to think of this as a thermometer. If here's 0 and we're 15 degrees above, I would say that's a positive 15 degrees or positive value. And then if a stock price is falling 4.26 points, it's going down, that would be negative 4.26. Okay, so there's some real life situations about where you need to consider positive and negative numbers. That's it for today.